What does it really mean to be a thought leader in B2B? That's what we're here to find out. This is the Notorious Thought Leader, a podcast for B2B marketers who want to generate demand by creating content that builds credibility and thought leadership. In each episode, Erin Balsa helps demystify thought leadership and uncovers how companies are using thought leadership to generate demand. Let's get started.
As you might know, I'm expecting my third child. I'm due to have him within the month. Recently, I've opened up about my personal journey to work less and live a more balanced life. I've been meditating regularly and experimenting with different spiritual modalities, including oracle cards, my pendulum, astrocartography, and I'm really expanding my view of success to include well-being, inner peace, and wisdom. I'd like to read you a quote that I really love from Arianna Huffington. I realized how liberating it is to complete a project by dropping it, and then being able to focus on the things I'm really going to put my energy into, what really matters to me. If you haven't already guessed, I'm moving on from this podcast. This is the last episode. The Notorious Thought Leader was a passion project of mine, and after 24 interviews with 24 great guests, I feel like I've accomplished what I set out to do, and that was to demystify thought leadership for B2B marketers. And this podcast really has shaped the conversation in meaningful ways. For example, Steve Hunt told me that he uses content from the Notorious Thought Leader for an internal course for SAP employees about thought leadership and career development. How cool is that? But now I'm stepping away to create space for our new family member. If I'm being honest, I've had a lot on my plate the last year or two, and something had to give. This final episode is a recap of memorable quotes from each of my guests about thought leadership. I hope you enjoy. Oh, and P.S., just because the show is ending, that doesn't mean you have to stop your learning. Please subscribe to my newsletter, Leading Thoughts, available at houseofbold.com. That's HAUS of bold.com.
You have to be doing something in a new way, in a novel way. You have to be codifying those ideas in a way that other people can execute on them. Again, if I just do something all by myself, that's great for me, but that is not being a leader in the market. So at its most basic definition, thought leader is have thoughts, be a leader, right?
The key about thought leadership is that you need to have leading thoughts. And the leading thoughts come from direct customer insights with the appropriate analysis and interpretation qualitatively, and by being in the details so much that you can develop leading thoughts. And so there's many thought leaders that love to write a book and speak at conferences, but never actually do any of the work and never know whether their advice they're giving actually works in practice or not. And so I think about it much more like being a practitioner that shares their learnings and ideas over time.
I think when a lot of people think of thought leadership, they think of like a CMO or an exec kind of speaking down at everyone and almost lecturing people about what it is they want to talk about. And I really like to think of it as more of a peer-to-peer kind of conversation. So that's kind of the most misunderstood part of it is that you don't have to be a CMO or a VP marketing to be a thought leader.
Yeah, I think of thought leadership as an age-old concept. It's essentially when you share either on your individual behalf or on a business's behalf, insights that are valuable to an audience. And because you share those insights, it makes others want to follow you or work with your business, essentially be associated with you. And I think that you could call something as early as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, even before that, Confucius, a form of thought leadership. Somebody is in the forum and sharing wise ideas. And if there was something for them to sell, then people would have been happy to buy it because they've developed trust because these individuals are sharing valuable ideas.
I think that first and foremost, a company has to have sort of that platform that they're trying to evangelize. And then everybody lines up behind it. And it can be the C-suite, it can be the intern, it can be the person that you greet when you walk in the door, but everybody has to have a piece of that mantra. Somebody might have the most experience, somebody might be the most passionate about it, somebody might just be the one that talks about what the company is doing, but everybody aligns behind it because, a voice of 100 is much louder than a voice of one.
Credibility matters a lot to me, and like knowing where people have worked and like the work that they've done before is really important to me in terms of how much of a thought leader I think they are. But you're absolutely right. That's me. I am like one segment of an audience out there. Like there are a lot of other types of people who don't think that that stuff is as important. And that's totally fine and okay too. This is just like where, like if someone, and it's like an individual or even an organization wants to figure out how to become a thought leader, part of this is defining like to whom.
Right.
Exactly. Like to whom and what do they think is a thought leader?
Thought leadership are people who share their professional expertise with other people in the same field. So you can have thought leaders in marketing, you can have thought leaders in paper making, you can have thought leaders in car making, you can have thought leaders in the sex industry. A thought leader can be anywhere. As long as they are sharing unique expertise related to their field that answers questions better than everyone else and do it consistently, that is thought leadership. And it doesn't just have to be an individual. I think that's another misconception we have, that thought leaders are individuals. No, thought leaders can also be companies. Companies that have proven themselves worthy over years of creating content around that topic that they're trying to establish thought leadership on.
I say that thought leadership is the intersection between three things. So it's expertise, innovation, and education. So it all starts with a subject matter expert who develops a new way to solve a problem and then educates others about that problem and the new solution. And let me give you an example. You know Seth Godin, right?
Of course.
And Seth, in the 1980s, Seth Godin was full on the advertising industry. And he was just witnessing how companies were spending lots of money on TV ads, on print ads, without knowing the ROI of their investment. They had no idea if their messages were resonating with people. So he said, this has to change. So he studied how advertising was done. He invented a new marketing category, which is permission marketing, which is like one of the pioneers before inbound marketing and what we do today. But he was one of the first. And so he was an expert in the industry. He innovated, he created a new category, and then he began educating others through his books. He wrote a book on permission marketing, then he wrote blogs. At one time, his blog was the most popular blog in the world. So videos, online courses, talks. So he had those three things: expertise, innovation, and education. And I think most B2B companies don't do thought leadership today because they're missing one of those three elements.
Let me start by saying what thought leadership is not, and then I'll say what it is. What is not is, here's why you should buy my product. That's not thought leadership. That's promotions, that's marketing, that's copywriting. And I think there's been a bit of a dumbing down of what thought leadership really is in the broad sense. Like everybody's a thought leader, but so much of what you see out there is just basically, here's why you should buy my product. That's not thought leadership. For me, thought leadership is map making. It's creating new journeys. It's either illuminating destinations that people have not seen before, or it's illuminating entirely different ways to get to destinations that people have seen before. But it's like the difference between the map maker versus the map reader, that the thought leader is the one who is exposing and shining a light on new risks, new opportunities, new destinations, and new roads that others have not yet traveled. I think that's really what it comes down to.
So just defining thought leadership is a tricky animal because it's so many different things all at once. It's a strategy. It's a type of content that's informational and focused on really advancing a point of view. In a lot of ways, it's also a brand principle. Brands that have a thought leadership orientation are more focused on ideas, on innovation, on moving whatever their piece of an industry or their niche is, moving the dialogue forward, not just promoting a product, but moving the entire dialogue forward. And in a lot of ways, I see thought leadership as, a type of content. It's an approach to marketing that's very focused on ideas and innovation. It's also a commitment because organizations have to commit to being thought leadership. So you can't just throw a white paper over the fence once a year and baptize yourself as a thought leader. It doesn't work that way.
You mentioned Chris Walker, and I think he has such a growing following of people who actually go and follow what he's saying.
Yep.
Okay. And he's saying a lot of things about attribution, and he gives out a lot of practical advice. Okay. So people go out and try out his ideas, and he knows that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if that gives a lot of responsibility, because he could succeed like getting attention and giving out tips, and people use it. But if eventually people use it and it doesn't work, that will backfire. People will come back angry. And it happened a lot in the past that this actually happened. And these people ended up being perceived as hacks. So that's the, double-edged sword of thought leadership.
The thing that I have always been wary of is growing, as you're trying to grow a brand, leaning too hard on individuals at the brand to grow it who aren't like founders or like core to the business. Because again, if they leave, that puts the brand at risk, right? But at the same time, that's kind of what works now, right?
Yeah.
Like organic social media for B2B SaaS is completely useless. Like, don't do it. Like, you don't need to manage your company accounts. But people at brands are really good at building community and growing brand awareness. So it's both like a necessary, but also risky.
Yeah.
But that's just where things are at right now. Nobody felt like when I started in community management, it was like everyone followed SaaS brands. It was like the thing to do. They were hot. They were, cool. They were hip. Now it's like they're all stodgy and no one cares. So it's like you kind of have to take the individual approach.
People talking about it so differently. Like I hear people say, "I published a blog post. Look at me. I'm a thought leader." But I think that, and I think it's interesting. So this study's a few years old, but right before the pandemic started, I did a study with Andy Crestodina from Orbit Media and with SurveyMonkey. And we set out to really understand how do marketers understand thought leadership. And again, the data is old, but it was so interesting because we asked questions like, which qualities are essential versus nice to have in thought leadership? Or can a brand be a thought leader, or does it need to be a person? Or things like, does a thought leader need to have an active audience or a large audience? And it was very interesting because in those results, we saw there was very little, there were definitely trends, what people believe thought leadership to be. But in so many of those questions, like there was a very mixed bag. Even if you ask marketers what thought leadership was, it was all over the board. So I just don't think as an industry, we've done a really good job defining thought leadership. And I think also people who are doing thought leadership kind of define it the way that they can actually deliver it. So, so it just makes sense. But used from our data, it's not really clear to marketers what thought leadership is.
I'm sure this gets thrown out all the time. The whole Gartner image that shows how the B2B buying process has changed with how many stakeholders you're involving, how long it takes. It's just shifted I think they put it out in 2017 or 2018. And then it took a couple of years for marketing teams to shift what their approach was. So I think thought leadership is aimed at addressing that new buying experience and buying process, because it's no longer just pointing them to a landing page, getting them on a demo, and then closing them on the sales side. It's taking time to educate each stakeholder involved in the process over the course of months.
For me, the way that I think about thought leadership and have for a while is thought leadership is really, a relevance play in the B2B context. So you're using thought leadership not for the hell of leading thoughts or things like that, but to actually remain relevant in this increasingly competitive space with tons of voices. And, let's be honest, like in the B2B, sales and marketing cycle, it's not easy to get your product front and center 24/7. Like people just like, they don't care, and you have to give them a reason to care. And thought leadership does that really, really effectively. But I think, more broadly, thought leadership is about making a commitment to having a perspective, and that is something that might start with, your CMO or your CEO, but then it manifests in different ways throughout your organization. So thought leadership, is about having that differentiated opinion, but then being, willing to share that across, your marketing activities and your marketing channels on a regular basis.
Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've put a lot of pressure on the technology companies that are coming in and trying to save the world. And everybody feels like they need to have this huge perspective on what the world is going to look like in the future. And they need to have this differentiated perspective on their industry and how it's going to change over the last couple of years. And I think that's produced a lot of really positive conversation, but it's also produced situations like someone like Adam Newman, who is the co-founder of WeWork, who basically created this illusion that he was completely remaking commercial real estate, which when really he was just doing something quite similar to what was already being done with the Regus business model, and WeWork has proved to be equally successful. So I think there's a negative connotation that comes with thought leadership because of incidents and positions like that, where people have forced it onto an industry or a product where it's not necessary. At Workable, when I was there, we built out our content to focus on really actionable content, which was like more how-to focused content. And then we also had a blog which allowed the CEO and some of the other executives in the company and some of the really strong writers to kind of talk about what they were seeing in the industry and where they felt like the industry should be going.
There's many people ready to share their thoughts. They want to share their thoughts, but often one of the biggest things holding them back is just overwhelm of, oh my gosh, where do I even start? What do I say? And I think that's part of it. The fear is not having a real clear focus on what they want to share, what impact they want to make. And I think when you get clear on that, it really does help. But yes, to answer your question, I think it is. I think the corporate world, especially if you've been in the corporate world a while, we've been raised to act and speak and be in this corporate box. And I think times have completely changed, especially since COVID. It's just like, fast forward. And I think we're, consumers, the world is demanding, employees are demanding a lot more of our leaders, our experts, and they want to hear their perspectives and opinions and authenticity and a little bit of vulnerability. And it's really hard, I think, for people who have been in the corporate world for a long time to step out of that box that they've been trained to be in.
My definition of thought leadership is they're essentially the shower thoughts that you've had about your job or your industry, crystallized and articulated so that they're fully fleshed out, and then backed up with expertise, reliable sources, and data. So if you've worked in any industry or any job on the front lines of anything, whether you're a software engineer or you're a marketer or you're whatever, like, you have expertise and experience and thoughts about that job and about that industry. And they probably like bubble up at these like times that you least suspect, maybe at, the dinner table or while you're taking a shower or just you're like on a jog or whatever. Sometimes they're expressed to other people, but a lot of times they kind of stay dormant inside you and they're there. You haven't quite articulated them yet, but they're there and you harbor these thoughts. So my job, and I think what actually turns it into thought leadership, is if you take the time, usually I think it works best with another person, but if you take the time to articulate those thoughts, and then back it up with actual data, back it up with actual like real world examples or frontline missives. That's what takes it from just being like a take and actually turns it into something actionable.
Gartner's has an offering called like inquiries, where you can pay Gartner's analysts to meet with you, and you can share some projects that you're working on or content that you're creating, whatever it is. They really like, you can share anything with them, and it's pretty much a consulting kind of feedback service where they look at it, they analyze it, they help you make it better, right? They give you suggestions, recommendations, and to be honest, they're fantastic. So their analysts are really like grade A analysts. And so the feedback we were getting was awesome. And I wanted that feedback. Like I needed that feedback. But what I really wanted was them to know what we were doing and who we were and how freaking good we were at it. And so while they were busy analyzing our stuff to tell us how we can make it better, I really wanted them to be reviewing that content to realize like, whoa, these guys, like they're really good at what they do. Right. And as we went through those inquiries over time, when customers then would go to Gartner and say, hey, what companies are doing this stuff and what, who's really good in the space? Like we came top of mind, right? Like they knew that, oh, Englepoint does this. Like you should go talk to Englepoint. And the referrals that were coming in from Gartner were just like, it was insane. And so over time, we were going to all the Gartner events and doing, speaking. You have to pay when you go to a Gartner event to be a speaker, right? To be a presenter. We're paying to be a presenter there, and just like trying to really build out our Gartner network and relationships there. And then just within a few years, and it is a long play. I'll tell you, thought leadership is a long play. If you think that you're going to start into a marketing program and employ thought leadership marketing, and it's just going to like crush it in 2-3 months, like that's not going to happen, right? It's going to be a long play. But these referrals coming from Gartner were incredible. And then they created this new magic quadrant for our space, and we were at the very top. They don't allow you to say the quote unquote the leader. You get in trouble for that. Yeah, but we were. So you have to say we were the highest and furthest to the right is what they allow you to say.
And last year we did a study of our present customers where we averaged it, or we generalized the data, so I kept it anonymous, but started to look at how long is our customer journey actually, like, and then turned that into a benchmark report where we could say like the average customer journey in a B2B company with Dream Data would be 192 days from the first touch until somebody bought. There'd be more than 2 people involved in every deal. There was 31 sessions involved in every deal. And these benchmarks really caught the eye, I would say, of a lot of B2B marketers out there on LinkedIn, but also different kind of software vendors started to spot that these benchmarks came out in their favor. So a good example is that we found in our benchmarks like real perhaps not scientifically correct benchmarks, but it was more than 400 companies that we looked at, that if people come from review platforms, they convert faster into new business. They're more likely to become new customers. And G2 took that benchmark report and started to pitch that to journalists because here's some unique data that we've not seen anywhere else. And we want to let more of our followers know that if you come from a review platform to a website, then that's high quality traffic for your business.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing, and this is what I think that's how I perceive thought leadership is when you have something unique to offer to the industry, the niche that you're in. That's when you're like kind of just breaking down the word thought leadership. That is when you're leading the thinking in your industry.
Right. A piece of content on content writing or content marketing, for example, for say targeted to a director of content versus a content writer is going to have different things, right? So logic is what restricts your scope so that you're only writing what your specific audience wants to know and in the order that they need to know those things. It's actually the what, the why, the who, the where, the how with a general understanding of where your audience is at the moment, like where they are in their journey right now, what they know, what they want to know. For example, say we're writing a piece of content about maybe content marketing strategy to a director of marketing. They already know what a content marketing strategy is. They probably want to learn about a specific kind of marketing strategy that has worked for you in your organization.
We have SDRs now, sales development representatives, whose job it is to follow up on each of those leads and to call them, to qualify them, and so on and so forth before pushing them up to the account executive. If we don't send them the volume, the SDRs have nothing to do.
Yeah.
And so the system starts to break down. So we have all jointly created this morass, this Byzantine maze of demand desperation, where there's a constant state of anxiety and angst over the lack of meaningful pipeline. And our executives, our board of director members, they don't necessarily know the best way to fix it. So all they can figure out is volume, pump more through, and we'll stumble upon some of those right people. The challenge is us marketers who are supposed to be creating a compelling strategic narrative, talking to the customer, building affinity for the brand. We're also the same ones who are minding the till when it comes to this volume machine that we've built. And so brands have this, there almost has to be a bifurcation where, yeah, you do still need someone to keep that current engine going, but we almost need we need some commando resources to peel off and to do the more strategic work that, while it might take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months to show an impact, it's almost like having farmers versus hunters. It's really difficult to turn a hunter into a farmer and vice versa. But if all you do is hunt, you're just going to eat meat 365 days a year. And if all you do is farm, well, you probably could survive a little bit better than that. But, it might be nice to have a turkey at Thanksgiving. So I really, really strongly believe that one of the ways forward is for us to, as marketers, continue to figure out how to maintain this status quo. You got to hit your lead quota or your pipeline quota. We can't just cut that off cold turkey. We also need people starting to figure out, how do I not only connect with my ideal customer, come up with that strategic narrative and the positioning? How do I figure out the path on which to guide them when we talk about thought leadership? Where are they now? Where do they need to be guided to? And how can I walk with them step by step along that path? It's super hard to play the volume game and to do this very strategic work at the same time.
Some think the job is about creating content. Others know the job is to create connection. And that's what the content is for. But if you hear 10x your content in 10x the time, or 10x less time, move faster, create more stuff, content, containers on a conveyor belt, you're thinking the job is to create content. Take the thing, chunk it into 20 little things, and put it in 15 different places. But the job is actually not to do that. The job is to create connection. And there are different metrics, there are different approaches, there's a different way of seeing the world, which is better for business. That's the rub in all this. Most of us are not P&G. Most of us don't sell soap that could be sold by any competitor brand. Most of us have some kind of personal perspective or have some kind of stake in deepening relationships, not just high volume throughput all day long, which is, the domain of monster companies that have the scale to win doing that. Most of us are actually in the resonance business because most of us need not just an active audience, but a loyal audience, a group of super fans that evangelize us, that get us new business for free. So whether you think like I do, which is I love the philosophical, the creative, the big ideas, or you're just a cold hard capitalist, I think either way, embrace that you're in the business of connection. You're in the business of saying something that matters and deepening a relationship with whoever's on the receiving end of your work, which by the way means internal stakeholders too. That's our domain. You are in the business of connection, which means you're in the business of resonance, not reach.
So one of the things that I want to encourage your listeners to think about is you want to walk a really fine line with your brand. So on one side of the coin, my encouragement is to let the visuals say what I don't want you to say about yourself, which is top of her category, thought leader, main stage speaker, media personality, wrote the book on it. In other words, authority. And then the flip side, the entirety of your content strategy from your blog to your bio to social media is all mission driven thought leadership, right? If you never take another step with me, I'm going to leave you better off as a result of having read this article or listened to this podcast. But as you know, Erin, I'm not interested in somebody's perspective until I know they're the person to teach me on this topic. And so, really practically on LinkedIn, if you've got a header image right now that's either a sunset picture, a corporate logo, a stock photo, some generic quote, it's doing nothing to build trust with somebody that doesn't yet know you. So give us a visual that's putting you in a setting that connotes authority. And few things, in my opinion, do more for an executive to kind of set them apart than a main stage speaking picture, ideally with the Forbes logo or the TEDx logo, or kind of pick the event. And what happens there is, I don't know, Erin, I do have an image in my mind of somebody that's on that stage next to that logo, Trust Accelerator. And so kind of think about that when people go through their website or their LinkedIn profile, et cetera. Are you associating yourself with brands that your audience knows, trusts, and respects visually to accelerate trust so that I'm actually interested in the perspective that you can bring?
So what the fuck is thought leadership? I think we've really answered that question. But just because this podcast is ending, that doesn't mean I won't keep sharing insights and personal stories to help you continue your learning about content marketing, writing, and thought leadership. Subscribe to my newsletter, Leading Thoughts, at houseofbold.com. That's HAUS of bold.com. Thank you so much to Motion, a marketers in demand company, for helping me bring this vision to life. And thank you so much for listening and being part of my podcasting journey. See you on the flip side.